Chapter 6 The Mystery Mummy. A moment later, Albert 3D gathered all the students together and led the class towards a four-sided glass chamber that stood in the center of the exhibit's largest room. "Here's our star attraction," he said, opening the door to the chamber. "We're keeping the door closed during museum hours. You're supposed to look in from the outside, but since the public's not here yet, I thought I'd give you a treat." Inside the chamber, a stone sarcophagus laid open for viewing. Next to it, there were three colorful decorative wood coffins that descended in size like Russian nesting dolls. The four clay canopic jars, each about the size of a paint can. A canopic jar, as you no doubt remember from your own studies, is a jar in which the ancient Egyptians stored and preserved the organs of the dead. Like many jars of the kind, these ones were topped with the head of the person, a falcon, a baboon, and a jackal, who were supposed to be the guard of the mummy's liver, intestine, lung, and stomach, respectively. Please, please don't touch anything. Despite the fact that his grave was robbed repeatedly, this handsome fellow is one of the best preserved mummies ever unearthed. His tomb was excavated just a year ago, and it's the first time the Egyptians have allowed him to travel. Everyone gathered around the sarcophagus and eagerly stared down at the perfectly asserted citizen of ancient Egypt. He's something of a mystery mummy. We don't even know his name. Around the museum we call him Atum, which means hidden one. Tightly wound linen bandages surrounded most of the mystery mummy's body, but his head was bare and his hands stuck out of the bandages just above the wrist. His hair, assuming he'd ever had any, was long gone. His skin had turned the color of bronze sculptures. His eyes were closed, but his mouth was open, revealing a few rotten teeth and a dark hole where his tongue should have been. "He looks like the painting they make Halloween masks out of," said Yoji. "What's it called?" "The Scream?" Maximus volunteered. Maximus must have been very preoccupied with the mummy in front of him, otherwise he would have mentioned that there is not just one painting called The Scream. There are several. The artist Edvard Munch painted the same image many times, as if he could never quite get rid of it right. The message is clear. If at first you don't succeed, scream and scream again. Maybe he was screaming in pain when he died. Then his mouth stayed open with rigor mortis set in. How about that? "People scream for other reasons," said Cass. "He could have been trying to warn somebody about something, like a sandstorm or a plague of locusts." "I think he looks like he's laughing," said Glob. "Actually, none of you are right," said Albert 3D. "His mouth is open after his death. The Egyptians opened the mouth of the mummy so they could breathe in the afterlife." "How did he die then?" asked Cass. "All we know about Atum is that he was a young doctor who rose to become the pharaoh's personal physician and advisor," said Albert 3D. Then suddenly, he ran his fingers across his neck, the universal sign for execution. He pointed to the small of Atum's coffin, where some hieroglyphs were painted in the black and red beneath the stylized face of the handsome young man. "Daniel, who wanted to read these glyphs for your classmates?" he asked, looking expectantly at his son. Daniel, not Daniel, who had remained remarkably quiet ever since they entered the museum, shook his head. The derelict swung back and forth like a spinning mop. "I'll read them," said Maximus. Albert looked at him surprised. "You read hieroglyphs? Your Egypt unit was more in depth than I thought." Maximus shrugged. "Kind of a hobby. Some people collect trading cards or play video games." Lob snickered. "Maximus reads hieroglyphs." "I do those too," Maximus protested. "He was being sarcastic," said Cass. "Just read it." She looked over his shoulder, hoping to see she might recognize one of those identifying hieroglyphs. No luck. Maximus coughed exaggeratedly. Ahem. "Okay, here goes. The name of this man is Secret. Is that the word?" Albert 3D nodded. "Go on." "Also, Secret is the reason for," Maximus stammered because the wild idea had just occurred to him. Could Dr. Toon be the doctor who had discovered the secret? No, he thought, there's no way. For his death, Albert read Albert 3D finishing the sentence. That was very good. Have you considered going into Egyptology? Yeah, I've considered it. But I still want to be a comedian, or a comedic magician. Max Ernst had a pretty good idea. He was going to wind up being a writer instead, but he hadn't fully accepted it yet. So nobody knows why a tomb was executed, asked Cass, who had the exact same idea about the mummy that Max Ernst had, only she didn't think the idea was so wild. Albert 3D shook his head. The inspection continues. Pharaoh asked for his wisdom, but he gave Pharaoh only his wit. It sounds as though he made some kind of smart remark at the Pharaoh's expense. The kind of thing one of you guys might say about, a teacher or a principal. He grinned at Miss Johnson. She didn't grin back. Whatever he did, I doubt we would think he deserved to die for it. In mummy movies, it's always the one who are wrongfully executed who come back to life, said Yoji. Yeah, we better watch out, said Glub, or we're all going to die of the mummy's curse. The idea of the mummy curse became popular when several men involved in the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb died soon after his disinterment. Later, people speculated that the 3,000-year-old bacteria released from Tut's tomb might have been to blame, but frankly, there is even less basis for that theory. I would go with the curse. Albert 3D chuckled. I think the people burying him were a little worried about that too. At the very end of the inscription, it reads, "In life he had the magic touch. Now many may his hand lie still." Guess they were afraid he might reach out and grab them. As Albert 3D led the class out of the sealed glass room, Cass and Yoji and Max Ernest leaned over the edge of the sarcophagus to examine the mummy more closely. So do you think it's him? Cass whispered excitedly, after everyone else had left. Who? Asked Yoji. Who do you think? The doctor who discovered the, Yoji nodded. Right. He was killed right after he was told it to the pharaoh, or after he refused to tell him. Whatever, it's almost exactly the same story. I thought of that too, but it would be a pretty huge coincidence, said Max Ernst. Of all the mummies in the world, for this one to be the one particular doctor here in our town, in an exhibit organized by our friend's dad, I highly, highly, highly doubt that to be the case. A lot of things seem highly, highly, highly coincidental, said Cass, irked. It doesn't mean they're not true. Plus, the hieroglyphs only said the reason he was killed was secret. Max Ernst persisted stubbornly. Not that the reason was a secret or the secret. Actually, he remembered, as he said this in ancient Egyptian, the word and the weren't always used. So there was little difference. But he didn't correct himself. He didn't want to give Cass the satisfaction. Well, I say it's him, said Cass, leaning in even closer to the mummy. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. She'd come to the museum hoping to translate the rest of the secret, but instead she discovered something potentially more significant. The man who had discovered the secret, and who, for that reason, had suffered the pharaoh's wrath. It was his dying hand, she was certain, that had written the secret on a piece of papyrus thousands of years ago. And it was the same hand, with its long, bony fingers, that held Cass's attention now. Although the mummy's wrist was bound to his waist, his fingers stretched upward as if the mummy was straining to break free from the linen bandages, as if he wanted to touch her, to grasp her. Transfixed, she stared at the mummy's fingers, and she and Max Ernst had found the ibis ring tied to the piece of shredded linen, just like bandages that had wrapped the mummy. Could the ring have once been encircled one of the mummy's fingers? Albert 3D had mentioned something about the mummy's tomb being robbed. The fingers were dark and crooked and broken, fingernails color of wood. She didn't see any sign of scraping or stretching where the ring might have been pulled off, but she couldn't be certain. Those signs weren't there because, frustratingly, a few of the fingers the mummy's left hand were blacked from the view of straight bandages. She only moved the bandages aside for a second. She glanced over her shoulder. Max Ernst had tilted away, and Yoji was about to walk out of the glass room. Taking a breath, Cass leaned down and gently pulled off the bandages away from the mummy's hand. Immediately she noticed the index finger below the knuckle was a faint but discernible ring where the mummy's skin had turned black. The black ring narrowed at the side of the fingers, wine on top to block oval. The exact shape of the ibis ring. Cassandra, Max Ernest, you urged you get away from there. Miss Johnson's voice broke Cass's concentration. What part of do not touch do you not understand? Cass spun around, her arms flailing in her attempt to distance herself from the mummy. Too late. She realized her sweatshirt sleeve had caught on something. She heard a snap like a sound of twig breaking, and next thing she knew, a slim dark projectile was flying through the air. It arced over Maxner's head as they watched, open mouth, landed right in the palm of Yoji's hand. He stared at it as he caught a live grenade. It was the mummy's finger.